When we have psychological safety, we have a feeling that we can speak up, we can share ideas, we can ask questions, and we can do all of that with any fear of repercussion or judgment.
We're so excited to have you here, Dave Moerlein, author of The Safety Effect. Just for effect, I'm showing the book, those of you that are listening. It's a lovely book. I was glad to read it, and I was even more excited to have you on the podcast. So thank you for joining 3 Points. Dave, how are you today?
Doing well. Thank you very much for having me. Excited to be here.
It's a pleasure. Tell me before we get started, I know when we met, you talked about putting out the book and how it was just something that you had inside you, you'd thought about for a long time. I'd love to hear just a little bit more about that journey of getting this book around this, which is called The Safety Effect, about putting it out in the world. How's that adventure been for you?
It's something that I've thought through for more than 10 years, and it took a couple different forms. I could even pull out some behind me in the closet. There's a big whiteboard with post-it notes all over it, and so many different notes that I've shared with myself. And the way it came together was I led teams at Google for over 12 years, and I was lucky to have very positive feedback around creating safe spaces for those teams. And I knew it wasn't something that happened everywhere, and so I wanted to share it. And so honestly, it was a ton of fun pulling together the research behind it, and then sharing my personal stories to go along with it, and then putting it out in the world. I'm figuring out some of the marketing stuff now and how to share the story with more people. But it's been a ton of fun.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, look, there's lots of value in that. As you know, with our podcast, we're going to cover 3 points around the safety effect and around some of the lessons that you share with all of us in the book. I'm excited to get to those. But first, one of the questions I always like to ask our guests is, why is this actually important to you? Why is psychological safety important to you, Dave?
Yeah. Um, So it's important for me, I'd say, just as a human. I think it's important for all of us. And so when we have psychological safety, we have a feeling that we can speak up, we can share ideas, we can ask questions, and we can do all of that with any fear of repercussion or judgment from those around us. And so I crave that when I show up to work, or I mean outside of work. I want to be able to share my thoughts without feeling judged. Um, but it's universal. It's something that all of us want to feel, and so um, I I think it's something that probably inherently we crave from a young age. We just don't necessarily know how to give it a voice or provide a name to it. So it's something that I've been passionate about for a while.
Yeah, I love that. And absolutely, having a voice. I mean, that's being able to having a voice and being able to share it. I think, for me, it always boils down to that, doesn't it? And again, critical, whether you're a young person growing up and it's in the context of family or relationships, and especially when it comes to the workplace. Let's jump into your first point. I'm really equally passionate as you are about this. And our point number one is specifically around the challenge, which is companies and leadership continuously fail to create safe work environments.
Yeah. So it's that they fail to create the safe work environments despite many of them knowing the benefits. So when we have psychological safety, those of us who are going into work, we're happier because we're speaking up and able to share ideas, and we're able to hear from others and learn from them. Our teams perform better because we're able to capture and identify challenges as they're arising instead of waiting until it's too late. And even celebrating our successes. We can identify without bragging. We can identify what's gone well for us and help others replicate it. So and companies then thrive as a result. And despite that, we still fail to create it. In the last couple of years, McKinsey came out with a study that showed that 3 out of 4 managers don't create psychological safety.
Wow.
And I don't think it's necessarily the manager. It's oftentimes we don't know how to create it, and so that's actually why I wrote the book. Is I think there's an opportunity for us to more directly support managers in their as they strive for this.
All the ways we can, improve psychological safety. I'm curious about um, how you've come to the sort of the point where you go, actually, it's managers. That's where we need to spend more time. And I don't actually want us yet to jump into point number two. I just want to hold the space on this first point.
Yeah. Yeah. So managers are key. When I led enablement teams, we would focus on managers oftentimes to help create the culture and for learning. And the same applies here for psychological safety. I actually, although managers are key, I think it really starts with each of us.
Hmm.
So the way I tend to think about it, and actually the way I organize the book, is that if we start with ourselves, that's the area where we have the most control. So I can control how I show up in a situation. I can control how I respond to something that's showing up as a challenge at work. Um, I could show up with anger or curiosity. Like, so I believe it actually starts with each of us, and pushing it towards leadership. Um, I don't know if disingenuous is the right word, but I feel like it's best to just start with us.
Yeah.
And then that said, the leader plays an essential role, because if you try to create the safe space, but they don't embrace it, it's not going to last. So if I show up and I want to share my idea with my manager, or invite a conversation within a group meeting or a team meeting, and the manager immediately shuts me down, I'm learning from them that it's actually not appropriate for me to do this. So it is on the manager to embrace that conversation, be open to ideas, even when they differ from her own, and that can feel really vulnerable. It can be scary.
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks for carrying. I'm glad I asked that because that's a real rich anecdote you shared about you show up, you share an idea, and the manager will either positively or negatively role model behaviors that will either make or break a safe work environment. I was thinking
Yeah,
as well, I also subscribe to your thinking around look, it starts with us. We have control over how we show up. And actually, some of the best experiences that I've been a part of or helped try to, try to create through the work that we do at People Playbook is helping give individuals sort of the skills and tools and the confidence to go forward and create and foster that culture. So for
yeah,
example, I my favorite thing in terms of building psych safety is when other people in the team also feel safe to invite others in and actually challenge either the manager or just simply create space for Dave. Dave's been sitting in the meeting for 45 minutes, hasn't said a word. I'm quite sure he has an idea. Now I can open up and invite Dave to share. And by doing that, I'm adding to the culture. And that really comes back to leadership being ultimately about influence. And each of us has our own level of influence.
yeah. And actually, as you shared that, it prompted something for me, because psychological safety shows up differently for each of us.
Mm-hmm.
So while I've worked with many people who they just want to speak up and share ideas in a team meeting. They speak to think, and so it's very comfortable for them. Others who might be on the other end of the spectrum might be a little bit more reflective. They don't necessarily want to speak in the meeting, but they still want to share the idea. And so if I'm the one in the room who for 45 minutes has an idea, but I haven't shared it, that might not be the moment where for me. And so that's another space where the manager can invite a different type of conversation, and even maybe say something like, Dave, I see that you haven't spoken yet in this meeting. How would you like to share your ideas? And I might say, actually, I want to do it in a one-on-one, or you know what, this is actually true for me. I prefer to think through writing, and so I might want to draft it first, and then I'll share in the next team meeting. So um, acknowledging the difference of preference and how we share, it can also it's a big consideration for making sure we have safe spaces.
Oh, Dave, so glad you brought that in and that thank you for sharing. It's a reminder to me as well about this sort of inclusive practice. There's a lot of talk about inclusion, but actually in the way you've described, for me, that's a real practical example of how to be an inclusive leader or teammate. So look, before I pivot us into your second point, I have one more question because again, you've talked about the benefits of psychological safety. Let's talk about when it's not present. Because
Yeah,
oftentimes, in order to enact change, in ourselves, in others, in organizations, and culture, we need to know what what the trade-off is and what the negative impact is of not making that change. So let's spend a little bit of moment there, and then we'll move on to point number two.
Yeah. It's a rich question because um, as you were asking, a couple of things popped in my head, and the first was like a feeling. So I'll start with us as individuals again. So when if we show up and we try to share an idea and we're shot down, maybe it just wasn't the right moment. But if it's a continuous thing that we're seeing from our leadership that they don't accept ideas, um, we are very likely going to start showing up more deflated at work. We're not going to share as many ideas. We're not going to bring our full selves to work. That means both emotionally and connecting with others, but also our best work. And so we as individuals aren't going to perform very well when we don't have psychological safety. It starts with the individual again, I think, and just how are we showing up, and then it falls to that leadership to listen. And there are many examples out there of when people were trying to say, no, this isn't working right, something's wrong, and and leadership doesn't listen, and then
Yeah.
things go wrong for the company.
Yeah, it's scary. I mean, it is scary. It's frightening, and it's happening everywhere. It
Yeah,
doesn't matter what vertical or industry you're in. It is just that uh, some organizations and business models, there's another level of scariness because of the impact on lives. So, okay, I think we've covered our point one. Companies and leadership continuously fail to create safe work environments. Let's pivot into point number two, Dave, which is more oriented around the solution, right? So now we've talked about the pain point. Let's get into this, which is point number two. We need to connect psychological safety to everyday business operations.
yeah. So I'll go back a little bit. There's really good information out there and good research, largely from the academic side. I think it's Google is one of the few companies that's done some of this research, and they're really good. There's an awesome playbook out there. How can you create psychological safety within your teams? And what I've seen is that most of those end with psychological safety as the goal. And what I believe is missing is that next step of how does that goal then impact what we care about at work. So we care about each other. And hopefully we care about each other at work. But if I talk to a sales leader and I say, why are you showing up every day? It's probably to drive revenue. And if I talk to a customer service person, it's to meet with as many customers as possible and have them walk away happy. You talk to a doctor, they want to see patients and have their patients well supported and taken care of. You talk to a nonprofit executive director, and their goal is to have the biggest impact aligned to their mission.
Mhm.
I'm not aware, maybe there's somebody out there, but I'm not aware of a leader that says, our goal is to create psychological safety with this business. They have something else that they're trying to achieve. And um, and when I led enablement teams at Google, one of the things I found was when we fail to create that connection between something that we might deem as a soft skill, like psychological safety, and what we're trying to achieve for our quarter, and what we're going to be comped on and where we're going to get our bonus, it's really difficult to drive engagement. People might have interests, but they might not then show up when on the day of when they could make another three sales calls. And so it's about creating that connection, and it can show up in everything we do.
Yeah.
So the framework that I have is it sounds very simple, but we often fail to actually implement something like this. But it's to invite the conversation, allow an individual to share their ideas, and then truly listen, be open to their ideas, and adjust when necessary. Sometimes you want to adjust, that's okay, but to have that conversation, and that can show up in a one-on-one, it can show up in a team meeting, it can show up in our annual planning. It's and as you're working towards your goals throughout the quarter, it can be we can be asking the question, what's working well for us? What challenges do we expect to face in the next month that we can all work together to solve? When we open that conversation, when we create the space for that feedback, it allows us again to more quickly identify solutions to challenges. And it doesn't have to wait for some offsite where we're talking about psychology. It's every single day, every moment when we show up, we can ask those questions and begin to solve the challenges.
So what we're saying here, Dave, is it's about not having psych safety as the goal, but really connecting it to, our business imperatives and the things that we're really focused on in terms of goals.
Yeah, and if we almost even think of it as like I think of it as like a progression of like, over here we really want to drive our business outcomes, 'cause that's what's gonna allow us to keep our jobs and the business to keep running. And over here, just a little bit, there's psych safety, and what we need to do is create that connection
Mm.
to what those business outcomes are.
Yeah, listen, this point number two in particular resonates so much with me because, as I mentioned, we're constantly being invited to support organizations with psychological safety, and the shift that I've noticed is probably as a response to your book, Dave, in the sense that they're moving away from just saying, "Oh, we want to do a psych safety workshop," a standalone, sits in the middle of the air, and it's a nice to have. Uh, Most organizations, I've got three in my mind right now. One in Google, L'Oreal, which I'll tell a story about, and Travel Perk. Each of them are actually being much more thoughtful and strategic about saying, in order to achieve X, Y, and Z, we need to create this culture of psychological safety. I'll give you an example in L'Oreal. It's a good friend of mine and collaborator, Connor Swenson. His business is Forgewell. He's the CEO of Make Time. And he invited me in to do some work with him in L'Oreal. And they were introducing a bunch of new things, like a bunch of new, basically, transformational programs. But what they did was they baked in a psychological safety component, and they referred to it, either they or Connor referred to it as the soil from which everything else will grow. And I quite liked that analogy, the visual, because it's the soil. Is it fertile? Is it going to allow you to thrive and help your organization transform and change for the better? I quite like that. How does that sit with you?
Love it. I love it. It fully resonates, and yeah, you can try to grow that plant or grow that tree in some infertile soil. You can keep throwing some stuff at it, but it doesn't matter how much water you throw on it if the soil is infertile. It doesn't have the right nutrients in it. It's never really going to grow. It's just going to die
Yeah.
off. And I don't know if you did this on purpose or not, but my background's in biology before I got my MBA. So that was it's that lands particularly well.
Well, listen, everything's intentional with me, Dave. It's not made up on the spot. No, I'm kidding. No, well, it is. It's an interesting metaphor, visual, and the two other little anecdotes that come to my mind is one. I've got a particular leader from another organization who is unfortunately resistant to doing work in this space because what has happened, I think, and I'd love you to share more about this, is that the term psychological safety has been overused and misused, misrepresented, and therefore it is seen by some business leaders as this is a bit fluffy, a bit soft, a bit nice to have, and actually it's not going to help me achieve the goals, and they kind of just dismiss it.
Yeah, I think it's not only uh, a concern around it feeling fluffy. I think it's also can be politicized. I mean, it's
Mm.
and so uh, it's easy for terms to take on sort of a meaning of their own, where it's beyond what it was originally intended to be, and um, and I think we're probably in a space of that where there is a group of people who naturally gravitate towards this type of conversation and recognize the potential value, and others who maybe not as much, or might even have some aggression towards it.
But absolutely, we're completely aligned on that. Let's move to your third and final point, which is, yes, as you mentioned, it's all around activation. And what you're saying, Dave, is we could all create safe spaces filled with happy workers that also contribute to business excellence.
It might be a slight transition from the path we thought we might be going down around activation. So you can bring me back if I'm not going down the path you had hoped to follow. Um,
Dave, I have no hopes, just aspirations that we have a great conversation and we enjoy it, and anyone listening enjoys it. But no, please take us there.
Perfect. And I feel safe here, so you can share whatever feedback you have. Um, so the activation is really, it's a continuation of the conversation around the solution. So if we're going to begin to integrate these invitations for conversations into everything we do and the majority of the meetings that we have, we're probably going to make mistakes along the way because we're going to be trying a lot. And so this is a journey. And it's not always easy to identify where somebody might feel psychologically safe. So I'll get back to physical safety. If we're walking down the hall and somebody disagrees with us and they shove us to the side, we know they crossed the line. I don't think any of us would really question that. When we're walking down the hall and somebody disagrees with us and they have an aggressive response to us verbally, we might feel something. There might be a line that we feel is crossed, but it's really difficult. It's more difficult to discern because how it
Mm,
shows up for you, Tony, is potentially difficult for how it shows up to me. And all of this ends up being influenced by our prior experiences, like other things that we had happen to us within our current work environment, our past work environment, our family. It can be influenced by our culture, our race, our
mm,
gender identity. All of these things influence how safe we feel speaking up in the environments where we are. And so, you and I, as two white guys, that doesn't mean that we are the same, but we have more likelihood of having some shared experiences that others that don't look like us or have our lives. They might be experiencing it in a slightly different way and showing up in a different way. So that's all to say that unlike physical safety, psychological safety is it's more nebulous. It's more difficult to discern, and we are likely going to make mistakes as we go down this path.
mm,
And there are three things that I like to keep in mind as I go through this journey to um, help support me and to continue even when I fail, because I've definitely had some failures along the way. The first is motivation, the second is mentality, and then the third is around our environment. Um, and actually, I'll pause there because I feel like I've been talking for a little while and I threw a couple things out there. Anything that you'd want to
no,
ask about?
I'm hungry to get into the practical takeaways. These three things that you keep in mind. I do want
Yeah,
to call out again how I appreciate you acknowledging the differences and the diversity of experience that others are going through in this space. I think that's critical. So thank you for doing that. And I think also the challenge, right, which kind of it almost is a full cycle back to our initial point and conversation that look, this is hard and it's not easy and we make mistakes and therefore that's why many people are not doing it so well and why we have cultures that are not incredibly safe. And I like that you've called out the challenges and the difficulties around discerning both for yourself sometimes, right? Of going, whoa, this isn't actually feeling right. I'm not sure what's going on. And for others to be um, onlookers, standing by and witnessing things that actually aren't right in an organization. So I think it's really helpful you've called it out. I'm curious now to hear about the motivation, the mentality, and the environment. If I got those 3 points correct, three
yeah,
points within
yeah,
3 points, Dave. This is quite
yeah.
meta, but let's go there.
Yeah, I'm going full Aristotle here. On the motivation side, it's about our why. So as we begin to create a new skill and continue to develop it over time, if we have a clear why, and we can go back to that, it allows us to revisit it in those tough moments. So for me, my why around psychological safety is I enjoy being heard, and I feel like I'm more myself and like I contribute more. Being hurt, even if somebody disagrees with me and leadership doesn't go down that path, at least I was hurt. And I would like to help others feel heard as well. And turns out I also like being really successful in business. And since this drives great business outcomes, it feels really good to thrive in both scenarios, both emotionally and financially when you do this well. Um, the second is around mentality, and it goes back to having a growth mindset. And so since we will have moments of failure, we can use those to learn and we can proactively identify again those challenges that we're facing and work through them. And when we have successes, we can take them and feel good about them as we move forward. So it's about maintaining that growth mindset and just reminding yourself, oh, here's my why. This is why I did this in the first place.
Mm,
I know, yeah, I knew I was going to fail along the way. It's okay. It's the next situation is going to be something new, and I can try a new approach.
Mm.
And the last is about our environment, and I find this one to be particularly impactful. So it's both our social environment and our physical environment. So uh, our social environment, so the people who are around us. If you feel uncomfortable starting down this journey of sharing ideas with your manager,
Mm.
consider finding a coworker where you could begin to brainstorm it and just test it out and get their
Mm.
feedback. You can find those pockets of individuals or bring it home. Like if you have a friend where you can practice this, like um, you can find those safe spaces, those safe environments you already have that they can build your confidence then to take it to those who otherwise maybe you wouldn't have felt it. And then our physical environment. So right now I'm sitting in an office in my house. If I really wanted to, I could look out the window over here and look at some trees and kind of normally I'd have some windows open, get some fresh air coming in. There wasn't some construction going on, and I use that to help me kind of recenter and feel comfortable where I am, and that brings confidence and comfort to me as I speak up. And so I think about where are the places within and outside of work where you feel that same type of comfort, where your environment feels good to you, and how can you replicate some of that within your work environment as well?
Yeah, thanks, Dave. That's super helpful. And as you were talking through it, what I loved about this model and this approach is that it makes sense, right? It's quite intuitive. And I think those are always the best things, right? That I feel like, oh, I can integrate that. Some of it I'm doing, but to have that sort of ritual and sort of checklist to mentally go through around motivation, mentality, environment is very helpful. I think two things came up for me as you were sharing. I mean, the the one is around the I think you said social environment, about
Yeah,
feeling challenged and difficult, or feeling some level of difficulty to speak up, to use your voice. I love the solutions that you offered. I also really like, for me, and I do this regularly with clients, playmakers, individuals I work with in our business. I sometimes say I actually feel a bit uncomfortable in sharing this. I'll call
yes,
it, I'll name it, I'll label it, and I find
yes.
that really helps. Is this something you adopt as well?
Yeah, like sorry, I was like interrupting you and giving you a thumbs up as you're talking, and just like yes, fully, just like I might not get this right, or I like this is a little scary for me, or that vulnerability also creates connection. Many layers to it. So
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's absolute gold. And for me, it's been really critical. My mother used to say, she always used to say, if you don't lie, you've nothing to remember, and I have a terrible memory. You don't have to remember anything. And I feel like calling things out, and I actually could think of a number of experiences where I felt like maybe psych safety was it was on the fence, that was on the line. We're either going to make it or break it here. And I find what's been most useful is, yeah, labeling it and say, I'm having a bit of a reaction to what you've shared. Here's how I'm
yeah,
feeling. I just want to be upfront with you, or here's my intent, and so on. So I find that to be really helpful. The second thought that came to mind, Dave, was from a quote from my one of my favorite leaders of all time. He was the most winningest basketball coach in college history. He's written books on leadership. John Wooden. Do you know John Wooden? You're nodding.
yeah,
Yes. Love John Wooden. And I love what John Wooden said with regards to kind of making mistakes. He said something along the lines of, if you're not making any mistakes, you're not doing anything. I'm positive a doer makes mistakes. Very comforting for people like me and maybe you, Dave. When we get it wrong, we go, it's okay. We're trying, we're aspiring to be better.
yeah. I I I love it. Um, And the phrase I would use around some of this is I'd give it a voice. So if you're feeling something, if you're feeling excited, I tell my team, give it a voice. Like, let's talk about it. If you're feeling nervous, when you find the right moment, give it a voice. And once you give it a voice, you can start to talk through it. And
That's gold. Oh, I'm gonna write that on my whiteboard as soon as this episode's over. Thanks, Dave, for sharing that. Okay, we're absolutely rocking and rolling, and we like to try and keep the podcast nice and punchy. And so I feel like we've covered great things in these 3 points. So first of all, we did look at the challenge. We talked about companies and leadership continuously fail to create safe and work environments. The second one, we then shared stories and anecdotes, certainly from my perspective in working with clients, and also in the research in your book, The Safety Effect, We need to connect psychological safety to everyday business operations. Absolutely. We shared some stories about performance management conversations, for example. In our third point, we talked about, the activation piece, and we could all create safe spaces filled with happy workers. And you shared a great model with us around motivation, mentality, and environment. So much gold, Dave. I want to tie everything up in a nice bow now and ask you our final question, excuse me, how do you think implementing these points could not only change the workplace, but the world?
And I should probably ask for permission. Are you okay if I read just a little blip from the end of my book?
Absolutely. Do it.
Okay, okay, sounds good. Imagine you show up at work tomorrow and everyone, employees and company leadership, has embraced psychological safety. You and others share ideas openly and with care. When you struggle, you ask for help. You're more successful because you're constantly learning and improving. Failure will happen, and you can learn from it. You practice creating psychological safety in every interaction. Psychological safety has permeated your organization.
That's the mic drop moment, Dave. I love it.
Yeah.
Well, I love it. What a euphoric end to your book. And for those interested, Safety Effect, excuse me, the Safety Effect is available on Amazon as a paperback, Kindle, and audiobook. And you can also access the audiobook on Audible and iTunes. And of course, give Dave a follow on LinkedIn and on his website, thesafetyeffect.com. No, I really love that, Dave, because it's a kind of it's the state that we all want to get to, right? It's the experience we all want to have, both in the workplace and just throughout our lives. So, look, I'm so grateful for you spending time with us on the podcast. It's been an absolute pleasure learning from you and hearing some of the insights and models and tools that are going to help us all live out the safety effect and create a more safe workplace. Thank you for that.
Thank you so much. I was happy to be here.